the world can feel very synthetic at the moment, but actually that human connection is by far the most deep and resonating and probably fulfilling relationship that we can have on so many levels.
These are people who accept us for the shadow parts of our personality, and that relationship has been built over consequences, both positive and also the less positive, that there may be tolerance, forgiveness and kindness that bind us together.
And I love that. I love the fact that we can have different flavors within those relationships. Yep. I love that harmony. We don't all have to sing off the same song sheet, do we?
I would never be seen at an Oasis concert, but I respect last year brought people together around a common idea, a common energy, and it was almost spiritual. It was like church. I understand it. It's just not a church I want to be a part of.
I need something that feels like I'm going to be held by a person for a period of time. That might be moments, it might be months. But for me, that would be that deeper core of friends that I can rely on and trust a little bit more, and also be more real myself and perhaps a little bit more honest with myself and my needs at that moment in time.
These are people who accept us for the shadow parts of our personality, and that relationship has been built over consequences, both positive and also the less positive, that there may be tolerance, forgiveness and kindness that bind us together. We're back.
Once again.
I know. Fantastic to see you.
As
again.
Always. Yeah.
Last time we spoke, we were talking about our intercourse with the robots, and particularly our relationship with artificial intelligence or synthetic intelligence, whatever we called it. And we talked about the importance of maintaining human relationships. We've talked about our relationships with partners. We've talked about our relationships with work, and then into the synthetic workers that we might all be bumping into. Today we thought we'd move our conversation forward and look at our friendships. Where do we begin?
Well, I think just in giving that nod, isn't it? You know, with the world can feel very synthetic at the moment, but actually that human connection is by far the most deep and resonating and probably fulfilling relationship that we can have on so many levels, that we don't have to have all the friends in the world in all the places and be able to walk down the street and high five everyone. I think that's very Hollywood. But having people in our life that we can turn to, that we trust, that we have faith in. They might have been there for long periods of time. They may be relatively new in our life. They're really, really important.
Yeah, we could literally have a lifetime of podcasts just on friendships, right? I'm sure that there are people who've studied their entire careers in psychology who've looked at this one aspect of the human condition. We'll start with thinking about some of our own friends. Have you got any?
I mean,
apart from me,
yeah, maybe
outside of this room, Karl. Tell me. You don't have to name names, but let's begin to explore the nature of some of your relationships.
I wonder what the definition of a friend actually is. That might help me answer that. I do know other people, and I do have friends outside of this room.
Right.
So yeah, there are other people in my life that I would absolutely term as friends.
We did this exercise when we were talking just before we came onto the podcast, to think about some of your... We talked and joked about best mates, right? Best mates works really well when you're 8, but works potentially less well. I know there's the best man, and then some guys obviously have multiple best men because they don't want to sort of like separate people out in that way. It's quite performative. But if you think about some of your mates, I wonder whether you could attach a single word to some of their characters. Like maybe give me a flavour of 2 or 3 of your friends and the single word that you would reduce your relationship to.
Is the word is the phrase that we spoke about before coming along.
I bet that's the highlight.
Yeah, that's about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
So trust was one of the words that we spoke about. Trust, connection, experience. Which actually points then quite a lot to perhaps some of the more longer relationships, I guess. The trust, connection, experience. I've got friends I've known relatively short spaces of time, but we've had incredible connections and incredible experiences. So those were 3 words that would come up and highlight key elements of individual people that are in my life at the moment that I would term as friends. What about it for you?
I think of closest friends and maybe three of them. One, I would say, if I had to say, oh, that person is this, that's not to reduce them to a single word, but it would be that they're funny. Right, incredibly funny, and there's going to be a lot of banter. The second would be, funny is definitely also true. So maybe there's a theme running through there. Like I find these people incredibly entertaining, and just the banter is fantastic. But there's a real honesty and a curiosity with the second friend. And with the third, I think that there is deep empathy and a sense of caring. Now, there are lots of other friends and there is lots of other words, and that's not to say that friend 3 is only caring and not funny, or that the funny friend doesn't care. But I wonder sometimes if I were then to think about my own contribution to a friendship, what would somebody say? Now, you could be morose about this and go, well, what are they going to carve on your gravestone? Maybe that's the Spike Milligan. There's a Spike Milligan quote there, which is, I told you I was ill. But I wonder, on my own, people go, well, he was, apart from a bit of he was generous, or he was this, or he was that. Because I think that can sometimes help us understand what we're contributing, however momentarily, right?
Yeah, that's right. Every flavour, every relationship has a different flavour to it, and that flavour might be slightly different depending on which side of that friendship you might be looking at. And I love that. I love the fact that we can have different flavours within those relationships, but you might take that one person and go, actually, you have a range of different flavours that make you the person that you are. And I love that about you. And we might connect on some of those flavours, and we might not necessarily connect on some of those flavours as well.
Yeah, and some of that can be really pragmatic, right? So even in that friendship group, there's one friend who, if we're going for a run, we'll go for a run. But there'll be a tipping point in terms of the distance. But that person chooses now to run, right? Not because they're necessarily less capable than any of the rest of the group, but they've made a choice that there's a certain distance at which they're kind of like, okay, I'm not having as much fun doing this. And I don't think, beyond 30 kilometres for any run, I don't think anyone's having, they're having type 2 fun. Yeah. And this friend has sort of gone, I don't need that much type 2 fun. I'll maybe get it from mountain biking. Now, if the thing was a mountain biking event, several of the friends would be like, no, I don't do that. And the ocean is one of those things, right? So this dude will come with us, but he won't surf. It's not because he's afraid of water necessarily. It's just like, I'm just not a surfer. But I'll come and we can skate and do all the other things. But like the wet bit, you just knock yourselves out. So yeah, we're even in a close friendship group like that, we have different edges that work or work less, and yet there's still a cohesion, right, between either individually or collectively.
I love that harmony. We don't all have to sing off the same song sheet, do we? But we have the potential to have so many threads in common, even if they're not immediately visible from the outside.
Yeah.
My wife will often say, "You're nothing like your friends."
Okay.
And that can be interpreted in many, many different ways. But there is a thread that binds us together as
what do you think
friendships.
That is? I'm interested. What is that thread?
I joked with her recently and said I think it might be neurodiversity. Now, we might argue that all of us are neurodiverse. But when I look at the people that I've been friends with for the longest of times, and I'm now 49, coming up in a month or so. So it's the people that I've known since 40 years, people I've known for 3 or 4 decades. I think there is something about we might have completely different interests, but that loyalty, that always coming together and always having a bit of a laugh, always having a bit of a banter, it's probably more than just one thing if I really, really start to dive into that an awful lot more. But it's interesting that there are plenty of relationships that we might have been much closer with in my teenage years, in my 20s, that those have fallen away.
Yeah.
So I don't actually know the essence of what it is that keeps that thread running through for that length of time, and possibly even beyond that as well.
that longevity of those particular relationships.
Yeah.
And they are seasonal, right? Some of my closest friends now, I've only known for less than 10 years.
Yeah.
I have no relationship with anyone that I went to university with. That's a consequence of some of the circumstances in my university years, where some of those things were very, very difficult, and they were difficult for the people who I was with. They were particularly difficult for me. And so it may be a consequence. But it was also that we kind of were redistributed to the four corners of the world after sort of 3 or 4. There was an intense relationship for 4 years and great friendships, right? And then, these things do seasonally fall away. They'd be wintered, and then new things spring up, right? I think COVID and what happened with groups meeting in different ways created lots of opportunity. Many of my friends now, I didn't know before the lockdown. We had time to perhaps interact with different people around interests in different ways. And these accidental collisions we talked about last week when we were talking about the way that Disney and Apple and other studios think about how people might meet. I think, COVID, none of us saw the consequences of that. Some of the positive consequences were these new friendships, which were able to transcend certainly space, because we were all isolated. That distance thing, proximity, was not necessarily the thing that bound us, but interests were.
That traction can come from all kinds of different spaces as well, can't it? You were talking about going to the pub the other day to watch the football, and you had a skateboard in your bag on your back, and someone came up who perhaps, maybe, possibly wouldn't have necessarily sparked up a conversation with you, but there was a conversational piece that was there. They no longer skateboard. You do skateboard. And then you were also talking about being in South Bank recently, and again having a broader a conversation perhaps with a broader range of people from society that you wouldn't necessarily have spoken about anything else about, but skateboarding was the thing that bound you together.
Yeah, that's kind of that tribal culture. Yeah. Where even if it's momentary, there's an acceptance, a collective consciousness, where you have things that bind you on the edge that faces one another. I mean, in the case of the South Bank, it was 2 sort of probably early 20s youths with no T-shirts on who were pro-level skaters, covered in sort of scars and grazes, coming over to a 56-year-old guy who frankly looked like he was skating with a Zimmer frame. I'm so incompetent, and yet there was something that bound us, which is that thrill and the flow of skating and the culture and its subcultures for lots of different reasons. But there was something that bound those two edges together momentarily, and there was an acceptance. And I think, whether it's music or it's football or it's sport or it's culture, it's arts, it's running communities, whatever it is, those edges bind for moments. And that is, I think, that top level of what I call, if I was being systematic about this, these are deal friends. Deal friends, there's nothing wrong with those relationships, they're wonderful, but we're brought together by sort of cultural rituals, for example, like going to a concert. You and I joked about this earlier. I would never be seen at an Oasis concert, but I respect that for lots of people last year brought people together around a common idea, a common energy, and it was almost spiritual. It was like church. In fact, a friend of mine, Mark Shaler, wrote a blog that basically sort of said, this is religion, this is a church. I understand it, it's just not a church I want to be a part of. Tell me a little bit from your own experience, where you've kind of experienced that essence of this collective friendship around an idea.
Yeah, and music's been such a big part of my life, dancing in particular, and I'm dancing tonight. We're going to go up to a pagan site in Stanmer. It's summer solstice weekend, so we're heading up there to dance at an old pagan site. And those people that I'm dancing with, they range from early 20s all the way through there to the oldest people there are in their 70s. It's beautiful. There's an older couple that go there, an older male and an older female that go and dance. And we're bound together by the dance experience itself. The number of times that I've been in a club and not known a person, and then all of a sudden we're dancing together, we might get chatting, and it feels almost in those hours that you've met someone that you've known for your life. Yeah. And just that bond that adheres you to that experience, to that shared experience. there's an awful lot of science and data and research that goes into the importance of music and dance and how that will often bind us together as human beings.
Primeval.
Absolutely.
Right. That is part of our DNA from the beginning of Homo sapiens, around fires and storytelling and dance and psychedelics and our rituals with nature and all of these things. And that is still primeval. There's a knowingness, right, in that group. So they are deal friends. Deal friends are also the kind of people that you can go, I really need, can someone come and help me move this large object I can't lift on my own? Or it's work related. Like I know you well enough to sort of like contact you and have a chat about, are you able to help me with my CV or a piece of work? There's nothing wrong with those types of relationships, right? They may not be deep and they may not be on an emotional level all of the time, but they're still incredibly valuable, right? And for the majority of people, we might see a universe of maybe 150 of those types of relationships, depending on context, where we are in the world, literally, where we are spiritually or mentally. These things will ebb and flow, but that might be a universe. There's much written about how many people are in that. I think the magic number, if there were one, is about 180, where we kind of like start to pitch out on how many relationships we can maintain. But then there's closer relationships that are kind of core, right? Which I call real friends. So there's deal friends and real friends. Now, what's the nature, from your perspective, Karl, what's the nature of a real friendship? And again, I don't want this to be performative, but those maybe half a dozen people who you can call for moments of shared joy or when the shit goes down, what's the difference about that relationship?
Yeah, and that for me is a bit more of that essence, isn't it? It's if my needs are deeper than just I need someone to put up a shelf for me, or can you help me, the jockey wheel on my caravan is fucked, can someone come and help me put it together? The need state of I want to go away with you for a longer period of time. Do you fancy coming away for a weekend? Do you fancy coming away for a week? Do you fancy exploring and progressing myself as a human being with you in that same space? Or I'm really struggling. I need some more support than just something that's a little bit transactionary. I need something that feels like I'm going to be held by a person for a period of time. That might be moments, it might be months. But for me, that would be that deeper core of friends that I can rely on and trust a little bit more, and also be more real myself and perhaps a little bit more honest with myself and my needs at that moment in time.
Yeah.
Because probably, very likely, those needs are bigger than a jockey wheel on a caravan.
Maybe, and those relationships are more forgiving. And I think you shared a poem, we'll put it in the show notes, from Dave White, the poet, although I think he does more than simply poetry. In many ways, I find him sort of adjacent to people like Alan Watts, thinking about psychology and the philosophy of mankind. But in that, it's like, okay, these are people who accept us for the shadow parts of our personality, and that relationship has been built over consequences, both positive and also the less positive, that there may be tolerance, forgiveness and kindness that bind us together. If I think about my really close relationships, then I understand what I may be able to contribute to somebody else's need states, and also where I can turn in moments of different needs. And perhaps that narrative, both the highs and the lows, and the fun and the banter and the joy, binds us into a collective consciousness on a one-to-one basis, but also as a small core group of friends. How do people transcend deal mates to real mates? Or could it go in the opposite direction? I mean, do people move through these different orbits of friendship over time?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that is possible, and given our circumstances can change so rapidly. And I mean, you mentioned the pandemic there, and the kind of the parameters in which we were, I'm not going to say encouraged, we were forced to live in for a period of time, extended period of time. That's one example where things would really have been more challenged and perhaps out of people's comfort zones. You might say that perhaps politically we might shift economically things might shift in a relationship, and perhaps even down to kind of spiritual or religion followings. We might see opportunity for a relationship to become a little bit deeper or to become a little bit more separated. I think all of the time there are multiple factors, external and internal influences on a friendship that might change it. But there are some friendships that are perhaps more likely to weather that storm. And maybe even some friendships that might deepen because of those storms as well.
These containers that we subconsciously put our relationships in are not hard-edged, although we meet on edges. Football is a great edge where we can, for a moment, 90 minutes or a little longer, oftentimes, we can meet with an edge to edge that is bound by the kind of the whole culture and rituals of an England football match. And it might be that on another edge with that same person in the pub, we'd have no common interest, but we found a second edge. We were both there for football and then momentarily found skate. But on other edges, like our political views, I doubt that we may have been aligned given the nature of the pub. It is possible for people to move through these phases, that there may be a moment where a deal friend needs to be a real friend. And that may also be for a season. And these things, they do ebb and flow. I've had challenges in my life where I've had real friends who, I've had to let go of. And I think there's two parts to that story, and maybe we can come back to this at another point, where it is just that the season is changing and it is the natural progress of a relationship, that it's descendant and divergent, and that's sometimes difficult for me but is understandable in terms of relationship dynamics. And the other is toxic relationships, and the other is toxic relationships that can get very, very complicated. I think that's an entirely different podcast. We'll be here all day. You and I have paid quite a lot of attention to the nature of these bonds, rituals, and friendships that happen in what people collectively kind of call men's circles. And the clearing is a type of gathering or circle. These are important occasions and moments of friendships, aren't they?
They really are. And I'm humbled to be part of them. And whenever I show up at a gathering, clearing, walk, pub, social, the people that show up there have shown up with a purpose and an intention, and that is just simply to be in the same space as other people. But being in the same space as other people isn't always easy, and friendships don't always come easy, and they can be a real challenge. And we know that isolation and loneliness in men is a real challenge. This is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month as well, isn't it? In, what are we now, June 2026. So there's a good reason for that awareness month, and it pointing to how men can often struggle in the company of others. My dad, by the time he died, he had no friends. He had acquaintances and people that he knew, and it wasn't because other people in his life had died. It's because he separated, and he chose to separate and leave himself increasingly more isolated. And that was a massive knock-on effect onto his health and well-being, mental and emotional. And it probably after a while played back into his ability to not only achieve relationships but maintain them as well. Loneliness is a real thing.
Absolutely. And we see a stat, there's a stat that again we'll put into the show notes that has just been released on current research. I think it may relate to the US, but we can use it as certainly a signal that for some people the number of close friends is reducing. It was, I think, a couple of years ago, the sort of average was 3 to 4 friends. And now in some parts of the developed world, particularly the Western world, some people are suggesting that it's 1 or less. And that means that there's a vacuum being created into which we can throw everything in the manosphere, or the tech bros, or the red pill. And when there is not this human connection, it is a rich environment for other things to be seeded and to grow. And sometimes that can be disillusionment, disappointment, depression, and other things that, really we are trying with the clearing to counter, to be a place where people can come to celebrate joyful moments, the highs of life, and also the parts which are difficult, the parts which are edgy. And in that moment, whether it is, like you say, 2 hours in the pub or 2 hours in a conversation or 5 or 6 hours or longer on a hike. It is that for a moment we are allied ship to one another and friends. Those relationships may be temporary, but they are also incredibly important in the moment, right?
Absolutely. There is also a nod to the impact on health and well-being, and loneliness has been shown to have a higher impact than perhaps other lifestyle choices, shall we say. So the impact of loneliness is real, and it's being documented, and it's increasing. And it doesn't mean we don't have global reach yet. We don't have circles or hikes and walks or gatherings in every continent, in every part of the world just yet.
Yeah.
But there are other men's groups that are out there.
Many, many, many. And so wherever you are and whatever you're into, I think the call is find your tribe. And if it is that is around some shared interest, from skating to football to music and even Oasis, find your people, because they will dance with you around whatever you care about, from fly fishing to surfing to all of these things. Stamp collecting, it doesn't matter where you start, simply start. And if you want to meet a group of guys who might be your age or your mentality, or simply open to a conversation, there are thousands of these groups all over the internet, from icebreakers to mankind to the clearing. There would be an opportunity every hour of every day if we take that confident step to find them. And again, you can try something. We have people who try before they buy. So they'll come to a clearing, go through a time together, and we may see them again sporadically, or we may see them again every single occasion. And that's absolutely fine. We're bound in friendship for a moment around, a common outcome, which is to make that human connection.
Yeah, we've had men show up with their dads, we've had men show up with their sons, we've had men show up with their colleagues, we've had men show up just out of curiosity. I think the curiosity is the most important thing. Be curious, be open. It could lead to something wonderful. At the very, very least, you're asking a genuine question of yourself. You're posing a genuine question to yourself of, I wonder what if.
Yeah, I love the fact that the last time we did a hike, it was a muddy spring day, and a young gentleman had found us on the internet and had joined us from London. I picked him up from the station, and he was in brand new white sneakers, and we were going to take a 13-mile walk across the muddy South Downs. And whatever you find, remember, this too will pass. He went home absolutely caked in mud. We may or may never see him again, but for that moment, walking side by side, we were friends.
And that's the most important thing, isn't it? That's for me, that's the lasting memory of today's podcast, is that for those moments, even fleeting, we can have friendship.
Absolutely. I think my final thought is, we sometimes wonder whether, are we contributing enough, or are we receiving what we need? It takes a first move. So perhaps if you're listening to this podcast, pick up your phone and ping a simple message to one or two of your mates. You might not have spoken to them for absolutely ages, but you are bound by something. Think about that single word. Karl, he's thoughtful. I'm going to send him a message just to go, hey, you know what? I miss you because you're such a thoughtful dude, and it would be lovely to hang out at some point. We don't necessarily need to make that conditional. It may not be able to be right now, but I think it's always wonderful just to ping a message to go, I'm thinking about you and what I appreciate about this friendship.
So where can people reach out and find us, Matt?
Please subscribe to the podcast. Thank you for listening today. It's brilliant if you just click subscribe. We can then tell you when we've launched another podcast. Secondly, you can come to our website. There's lots of interesting stuff there, events that we do, content that we write, information about the podcast, where you can meet us. So please come there and subscribe. We promise not to spam you. If LinkedIn's your thing, then both Karl and I have LinkedIn pages, and the clearing is there. And finally, if you'd like more visual content like Reels, then you can see us on Instagram. If you'd like to email us, email matt@theclearing.life. Same URL as the website, matt@theclearing.life, and we promise to try to answer.
I'll put all the links to all of what we've just mentioned beneath the description of this podcast.
We'll see you in the clearing. Thanks, Karl.
Thanks, Matt.